So there are elements here where it makes sense why it's clicking for the Canadiens, but the biggest one is just the maturation process of sort of the young core.
Let's bring in our friend from The Athletic, Arpon Basu. Hi, buddy. I mean, there have been points throughout this season where I've been like, man, got to have you on. Canadians looked cool last night or looked cool for this little bit, but by and large, the first 30 games of the season were not a particularly good time. What has it been over these last 10 that has made them so electric?
Buy-in, maturity. I mean, this is the second youngest team in the NHL, but they're learning that you can't shinny your way to wins at this level. Everyone's good. And if you beat a guy on a one-on-one, it usually doesn't lead to a whole lot. So you got to pick your spots when you do that. There's little like kind of maturity moments that this team is starting to understand. And really, I mean, you talk about the last 10. Yeah, the last 10 have been exceptional, but this team was last overall in the NHL on November 10th. Got spanked on Hockey Night in Canada, national stage in Toronto. Looked really bad doing it. They won a game in Buffalo on November 11th. Like since that date, they're top 10 in points percentage, wins, goals. They're a top 10 team in the NHL for the better part of the last 2 months. So really, like those numbers are great over the last 10, but this is a bigger sample than 10 games. Like if you put the cutoff in, this team is not only top 10 in points percentage in the NHL, only Toronto and Washington have a better points percentage in the East than Montreal since November 11th.
When you look at that discrepancy, like where do you think personally like the truth lies? Is it closer to the beginning? Is it closer to the end? Like how sustainable is this last little run?
Yes, the 10 games have been really good. This sort of run for Montreal runs back much longer than that. If you go back to November 11th, I looked at it today. Only Toronto and Washington have a better points percentage in the East than Montreal since November 11th. That's like 2 months of games. That's 25 games. So there have been some dips in that time. They haven't been perfect, obviously. They've gotten blown out a couple of times in that span. But these last 10 games are just like sort of an accentuated version of that 25 game sample for the Canadiens. Like I don't think they're a top 10 team in the league or a top 3 team in the East, but their performance and their record over that span, that's where they're at. I think they're tied. I think they're 8th in points percentage in the NHL and 3rd in the East since November 11th. And 2 months is kind of a bigger sample than 10 games.
So do you believe in them as a playoff team?
That's difficult to say. I mean, the only reason I do is because the East is sort of playing down to them. You can't. It's hard to have a 4-9-2 start to the season and make the playoffs. It's pretty rare, and to be last in the NHL after 15 games and then make the playoffs is equally rare. So the only thing that's made this possible is the rest of the Eastern Conference, or at least the bottom half of the Eastern Conference, has made it possible. And so if that continues, then yeah, I mean, they could make the playoffs. I mean, they could. There's some sustainable elements to the maturity the Canadiens are showing in the way they play for the second youngest team in the league. And so but I expect there to be some sort of, separation between sort of the real playoff teams and the aspiring ones like Montreal. And so they might fall short in the end, but all of this is just extremely valuable stuff for a rebuilding team that is as young as they are.
Are you surprised, though, with where they are? Like, I mean, the process has been kind of black and white where it was really bad and now it's been really good. But if someone were to tell you on January 7th that the Canadiens are a fringe playoff team, would you say, yeah, that seems about where they'd be at this point in the rebuild? Or do you look at it like some of us where it's just like, I'd probably have them a little bit worse just because they have so many young guys?
Well, yeah, I don't think no. I wouldn't. If you had told me that at the beginning of the season, I would be pretty skeptical. Like a lot would have to go right, and a lot has gone right. Listen, they've been like remarkably healthy this year after 3 years of like awful injury luck. But I mean, Laine got hurt in the preseason, so they didn't have him for the first 30 odd games. and he's been a difference maker. He's instantly made their power play quite dangerous and a difference maker. And the Alex Carrier trade, which has really flown under the radar, but they traded a player in Justin Barron that really did not look like he had a future in Montreal and was not really a good fit to what they were doing, and acquired a player who was a perfect fit to exactly what they needed for a young defense core who's come in and totally stabilized that entire group. And so there are elements here where it makes sense why it's clicking for the Canadiens, but the biggest one is just the maturation process of sort of their young core, realizing some of the less fun, sexy things that you need to do at the NHL level to win. They're sort of learning that as they go here.
Yeah, I mean, especially like their fourth line has been one of their best lines of late. It's been unbelievable. I saw their it's Emil Heineman, Jake Evans, Joel Armia outscoring opponents 11-3 over the last 10 games, that's bananas.
Last night they started the game against the JT Miller line and basically, bag punched them. I mean, honestly, like they just spent that entire shift in the offensive zone. Caden Cooley nearly killed Jonathan Leckler coming over the blue line. Like, yeah,
Cooley had a great game last night. He was awesome.
That's one of the best games I've seen him play. And like, these are guys that I think, we've gotten the sense are going to emerge into being like maybe upper tier, maybe not superstar players, but really good star level players in the NHL. I mean, Gooley's a guy. I mean, I went to visit him in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, for crying out loud, when he was playing in junior, and like it just like everything about him screams Shea Weber clone, and we're starting to see some of that, and that hit is something he used to do in junior all the time. I watched him play in Red Deer. They were down 4-0 going to the third period. He came out for the third and murdered someone, much like he did last night, and gave his team a spark. So, there's all these like Kirby Dach starting to play better, Alex Newhook starting to play better. Like all these kind of key pieces to their rebuild have kind of found their game all at once.
Can you tell me what you've seen from Dach? Because like obviously he's improved a little bit, but like we were looking at the numbers earlier today. Like a -23 in 40 games this season is pretty stunning, especially relative to the rest of the roster, which isn't that bad.
Yeah, it's the first. That 10-game sample that you guys showed earlier is really applicable to Dach. The first 30 games for him were terrible, and he would be the first to tell you that. It's hard to miss a full year. It's hard to have like 2 ligaments torn in one knee and come back. Everyone knew it would take some time. Close to half a season, though, was a bit much. But credit to him, he's stuck to it, and he was in a pretty dark place in terms of how he felt about his own game. Constantly answering questions about when are you going to start playing better? When are you going to be the guy that we saw 2 years ago? It's heavy in Montreal when there's expectations on you, and really, like much of this rebuild is unfortunately for him kind of on his shoulders. Like the Canadiens don't have a second line center in the organization that could replace Dach if he doesn't work out. So a lot's riding on this guy, and he was wearing that for a good portion. But like you look at the skill set, he's 6'4", verging on 6'5". He's a big man. He's got incredible reach. His stick, when he's on it, is very effective at winning pucks back, just maintaining possessions in the offensive zone. And he's a crafty playmaker, but you need some semblance of confidence to do all those things, and he just didn't have any for 30 games. And now you're seeing more of the version. I mean, last night, it took the Canucks 53 minutes and 41 seconds to get a shot attempt against Kirby Dach at 5-on-5. So it was pretty good, Kirby Dach. And so let's see if he can maintain it. His sample, to me, is still small. I still need to see more from him over a longer period of time to be convinced that, okay, this is the version of Dach the Canadiens are going to have. But the last this road trip in particular, where they beat the last 4 Stanley Cup champions on their home ice, was a pretty good sign for him.
What are we dealing with Lane Hudson? Like, is this a top 10 defenseman in the NHL in a year, 2? Like what do you think he's becoming? Because he's already obviously a sensational player to watch, but I'm sure that there's additions that he'll make.
Well, yeah, that's the main thing this season. Like, yes, he just took over the rookie scoring race last night with 3 points. He has an identical stat line to Adam Fox, who is basically his role model and the guy he wants to be like. He played against another guy he wants to be like in Quinn Hughes last night for the first time in his career. Was still pretty awestruck afterwards. His goal was banked in off Quinn Hughes' skate, which was pretty symbolic, I guess, in some ways. But my biggest takeaway with this guy is just how much he's already adapted in 40 games this season. At the beginning of the season, I'm sure you guys saw highlights, but like night after night, he was breaking guys' ankles. He was beating guys. He was head fakes, shoulder fakes, everything. Like his whole arsenal was on display almost every shift. And that's not even really that much of an exaggeration. And so when I talked about the maturity earlier, like he is exhibit A. Like he is quickly understanding that a lot of that stuff just led to oftentimes him being in a worse spot. Like he would just wind up beating a guy and skating himself into essentially a double team where he's like cornered against the boards and he can't do anything with it. So now he'll still beat guys, but it's not this series of dekes and moves and beating one guy after another just to wind up giving away the puck. Like he'll beat a guy, create that half second of space, and find a teammate quickly. And so his adaptability is really impressive to watch for such a young player. Like he is truly, and he won't mind me saying this because I've talked to him about it, but he is truly a hockey nerd. Like he obsesses over the game of hockey. That's all he really thinks about, talks about. He eats it, drinks it, breathes it. And so he studies it. And his coach, Martin St. Louis, is very similar. And I remember when he was at BU, I talked to Jay Pandolfo, and one thing he said, which was his coach, and one thing he said is like, Marty St. Louis is going to love coaching this kid. And you're seeing it. Like he is really, it's like a mini Marty basically. Like he thinks the game on a very high level. So what's his ceiling? I mean, Cole Caulfield was asked if he could enter the Quinn Hughes stratosphere last night, and he just kind of looked at the questioner like, I think you know the answer to that question was his answer. And the Canadiens, his teammates believe it. I believe it because one thing about Lane is like his defensive metrics are pretty poor. The eye test doesn't really match that, and I'm trying to figure out why exactly. But like last night on the Canucks' first goal, you know, Lane lost his man along the wall. That was, I think it was Höglander, sets up JT Miller, bang, back of the net. Lane's looking like a defensive liability, but more often than not, like he goes into puck battles with guys like 20, 30 pounds heavier than him, and he comes out with the puck more often than not. Like he has strategies to overcome his physical limitations, and he's used them his whole life, and now he's adapting those to the NHL. So I think his ceiling is sky high. Like honestly, like he's fun to watch, and he's going to be fun to watch for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, this year's rookie class is headlined by two guys whose games have translated way quicker than I thought they would, with Macklin Celebrini and Lane Hudson. Where would you rank them in terms of the Calder race right now?
Well, honestly, like if Montreal manages to squeak into a playoff spot, like that's going to help Lane's case a lot. You know, like that would help with voters. Voters would pay attention to that he's a prominent top pairing minutes guy on a playoff team as a rookie on defense. All those factors are going to help him. I personally think Celebrini's, you know, in pole position here. Like he's become appointment viewing, you know, as an East Coast guy. I'm staying up late to watch that guy. He's doing it with a lot less support around him, even though Montreal is hardly an elite team by any stretch, but there are, you know, NHL caliber more of them around Lane Hutson than's around Celebrini, and the things he's doing on a nightly basis is really something to watch. So, but I know that as a voter in the past, you know, last year I voted for Brock Faber. You know, like it was really like the Bedard Faber thing. Like to me, Faber doing what he did on the blue line on a team that was competitive, playing 24, 25 minutes a night, that carried a lot of weight with me personally as a voter. And Lane's basically doing that right now in a very different way. He's got a very different style of game, but I think that should carry a lot of weight, especially if Montreal at least stays in the playoff conversation deep into the season.
We all silly like the mayor.